Let the wind blow, let the grass grow. Let the bees make honey, let the poor find money. Take away their sorrow and give them sunshine tomorrow. If you remember, back in summer of 2017, we got a release called 1967 Sunshine Tomorrow, the title being taken from the lyrics to the song from Wild Honey, Let the Wind Blow, which I just performed a cappella and spoken word for you. Sunshine Tomorrow is a very interesting set because it's much like a box set crushed down onto 2 discs. We have a complete restored version of Wild Honey, so an album we've already had but fixed up for a new generation there. We have the unreleased Lei'd in Hawaii album in its entirety for the first time. Someday we'll talk about Lei'd in Hawaii and which tracks were previously made available and whatnot. We have sessions, we have outtake songs, we have acapellas and instrumental tracks. We also have some live material as well. Now, only a handful of the songs on Sunshine Tomorrow are done live. Most of them are from 1967, but not all. And apparently, even though it didn't have a super high charting position in the US, it fared much better in Europe, but apparently people thought there was enough positivity around Sunshine Tomorrow to warrant 2 digital-only sequels. One being other studio outtakes, different acapellas and things that hadn't been released yet, some stereo mixing of different songs that only been in mono and so on. That's the Sunshine Sessions. We'll get into that another time. That's not for today. Today we're going to take a look at the live component. 109 live tracks from 1967, most from November, but not all, on a little set called Live Sunshine. Again, digital download only. If you watched my video on Beach Boys Hawaiian locations, we talked somewhat about 2 of the concerts included here. Their performances at the Honolulu International Center, now the Neil Blaisdell Center. So some of the things I say will be repeated from my Beach Boys Hawaii tour video, but the others I have not addressed on here, at least not to a great degree. So that'll be a new experience for us. And of course I have several other videos talking about various digital releases. Here are a few of the others. You might recognize some of these. We'll get to the Big Beat one day. There's the 2020 sessions. There's the Beach Boys concert extended version. And something we will reference periodically. Last spring I did a video on Graduation Day Live 1966. This was the 2016 live download. So not as comprehensive as the subject of today, but certainly very interesting, and we can do some comparing and contrasting both to that and also the live digital album, that superseded our live Sunshine for today. So this set begins with 2 complete Hawaii concerts plus rehearsals from August of 1967. Now, Smiley Smile, of course, I'll hold up the record for you, was the group's, I guess, answer to having not finished their much anticipated magnum opus, what was to be their greatest album. You know it and I know it. Smile. Smile was never actually finished by the group, and indeed all this build-up for this album that was going to just reshape music and so on ended up being basically all for naught. Smiley Smile was put out in its place. The Beach Boys themselves were very famously disappointed with Smiley Smile, feeling it wasn't what they intended. There are a couple songs that are original to this album too, which weren't from the Smile sessions, notably Little Pad and Getting Hungry. So it's already kind of in a weird area. We have an album that the group isn't really happy with. It didn't do very well commercially. It, at the time, was the lowest selling Beach Boys record, barely breaking the top 50. And so to have a live document from the tour to promote this album is pretty interesting. And that is what those Hawaii shows are for. They're really the only document we have for Smiley Smile tour stuff. So the Hawaii shows start off with several rehearsals, and some of these are very unique, notably All Day, All Night, which is actually a version of Whistlin' from the Smiley Smile album. That's pretty interesting there. Okay, we start off with a Heroes and Villains rehearsal, which focuses mostly on like the backing vocals and things of that nature. These are songs are using very minimalist approaches, an organ and some basic backing instrumentation. The Beach Boys are stepping away from the wall of sound stuff and going lo-fi, and these rehearsals are trying to sort of translate those lo-fi recordings to something a live audience could really get into. You know, some basic songs probably wouldn't wow a live crowd. So they rehearse Heroes and Villains, God Only Knows, Good Vibrations, the Good Vibrations anniversary single. We talked about this in my 1 Foot of Fun 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 video. Claims to be from this rehearsal. I don't think it is. There are a lot of interruptions during this recording of Good Vibrations, and that kind of, I think, undermines the precision that's on this record here. I think this is the live in studio version of Good Vibrations that they would record in September. We'll talk about why they did a lot of the tracks live in studio a little later on. We have things like The Letter, which was brand new for the time. I recommend checking out the Arbors version. Special thanks to Watcher Fools, Suffering Fools for pointing that one out to me. It's almost Smile-like. It's a very good cover. They rehearse You're So Good to Me and Hawaii. Whistlin', we already mentioned. There's a couple takes of California Girls. There's a very long take of Surfin'. Surfin' isn't a song we associate much with the Beach Boys live set, so it's very interesting to hear it here, and it actually contains a few things that will be early kind of predecessors to their very successful 1968 song, Do It Again. So it's cool to hear that. They do Sloop John B, Wouldn't It Be Nice? California Girls the second time again. And then the 13th song on here is listed as a rehearsal, but I think it's actually the start of the actual show, a take of The Letter. It has an audience. You can hear applause and cheering and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if it was a live rehearsal or a warm-up. From what I gather, the Beach Boys were the last act of the show. They shared the bill with Bobby Gentry and the Pickle Brothers. We'll come back to them amongst several others. So I'm pretty sure they were the big finale, though. And then we jump into the show proper with Hawaii, You're So Good to Me, Surfer Girl, Surfin', which is referred to very sarcastically as a pimple from the past, and you can tell the group doesn't really want to do it that badly, but are doing it because it's their 5th anniversary and whatnot, and they think maybe that they should. But this is one that they just kind of rush through, and we'll talk more about oldies here in a moment as well. They do Gettin' Hungry, which would be their newest single at the time. Not sure if it was out yet. It would have been out very soon. Gettin' Hungry is on the Smiley Smile LP, and it was released as a single credited solely to Brian Wilson and Mike Love, which I think is maybe one reason why it didn't catch on, because Gettin' Hungry is such a weird song, but I would think that the record-buying public would have liked it more if it had been labeled Gettin' Hungry by the Beach Boys, not by Brian Wilson and Mike Love. Mike jokes that the rest of the band does indeed help them out. We have Sloop John B, California Girls, Wouldn't It Be Nice, Heroes and Villains. This take, I believe, is the only thing from the 25th that's actually been released before. It was the bonus track on, oops, not on this CD though, it was the bonus track on the Live in London CD, excuse me. I'll hold that up for you so you can see it. It was the bonus one, they put it with the Live in London tracks. The only Live in London outtake was All I Want to Do, which they opted not to include here. They went with a Hawaii track as the bonus instead for some reason. Maybe they thought Heroes and Villains was a little more bankable, I guess. At least that's what I would say. That one was released before. And they finish up with God Only Knows, Good Vibrations, and Barbara Ann. Barbara Ann, they are mentioned to be brother recording stars instead of Capitol recording stars. And the announcer notes that, oh, you guys have been a great recording audience, this album's going to sound wonderful, and so on. Very interesting. Now, apparently the group was quite high on LSD and other assorted substances when they were recording this Hawaiian album. The audience in the first show is excited, but they're not too over the top. The second show is a different story. But, you know, the groups, they sound kind of ragged, but I think the Hawaii shows are necessary listening just because of how fascinating and bizarre they are. So there's another show, and this one we actually had a few releases from before, notably as some of those live tracks on the aforementioned Sunshine Tomorrow CD. So the bulk of the stuff we'd already heard is from this concert on this set. So the track list, basically the same, with just a few small alterations, but first we have some additional rehearsals. So they do songs like The Letter and Hawaii and stuff again, but there are a few changes. Notably, they kind of mix in doing Surfer Girl and God Only Knows together, which is kind of strange. During the rehearsal, they jump back and forth a few times. I thought that was kind of interesting. They also wanted to do an a cappella song, so they rehearsed both Their Hearts Were Full of Spring and the Lord's Prayer. These are very long rehearsals, and it's kind of just, there are points where they're just talking, or like Brian Wilson's just kind of noodling around on his organ, and it's not really a rehearsal per se. I do like that they do part of And Your Dream Comes True while rehearsing Their Hearts Were Full of Spring, and ultimately the group would not do an a cappella live at this particular show. Some of these rehearsal tapes are very long, like 6, 7, 8 minutes, and you can hear a few instances this kind of whining, whirring sound where you can tell the tape reel ran out and they put a new one on. So there are a few cuts here and there, but in terms of just, running a tape while the group's recording and, recording all these for posterity and whatnot, pretty interesting stuff. And we get to our second show. They kick off with a song that was released on Sunshine Tomorrow entitled Hawthorne Boulevard. As far as I know, Hawthorne Boulevard is completely unique to the Hawaii concerts. It's just a brief surf instrumental. It's less than a minute long, but they used it as like their intro music as they came out onto stage. It was very interesting and kind of warmed up with it and whatnot. So I like that it's here because I don't think it's anywhere else. As far as I know, it is completely exclusive to those August Hawaii concerts. They do Hawaii again, and You're So Good to Me and California Girls and whatnot, but Help Me Rhonda is added to the set for the first time. They didn't do it in the first show, but they opt to do it in the second. We have the usual stuff from Pet Sounds and whatnot. Getting Hungry is a remix of the version used here, as are Surfin' and The Letter, most of which are just shortened with like the audience banter and whatnot. Speaking of audience banter, the second show the crowd's a lot more engaged, I think, and they're yelling and carrying on, and Mike Love has some weird exchanges with them about various things and talking about the songs and whatnot. It's kind of strange. And they end, of course, again with Barbara Ann. Two shows, basically the same with the exception of Help Me Rhonda. Interestingly, there is film footage that exists from the concert. It's been released in a couple of Beach Boys documentaries as well as on the Sights of Summer. You can find some of it there. Most of it's silent, but they set it to songs they performed, things like that. The two Hawaii shows, despite being very unique, having some interesting arrangements and songs you don't really see elsewhere, were kind of seen as a total failure, and indeed the Beach Boys would put all those in the can, with the exception of that Heroes and Villains thing I mentioned, which would come out in the 90s, but those would all be filed away, and the group would try to do it again live in studio in September to release an album called Lei'd in Hawaii. Lei'd in Hawaii was released kind of piecemeal throughout the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, and the early 2010s, until finally, 50 years after it was recorded, it was released in its entirety on Sunshine Tomorrow. It's the kind of the kickoff for the second CD. So we have an old album, Wild Honey, with a new look, and we have this, I guess, kind of new Beach Boys album released in its entirety for the first time. So that's pretty neat. But those are the Hawaii shows, and that's about the first 50 of the 109 tracks. Very interesting. Yeah, from a musical standpoint, it's probably not the most fascinating thing, but we don't really have Smiley Smile live stuff. This is the only time, as far as I know, that we've ever heard a Smiley Smile tour concert kind of thing. We have Brian Wilson playing with the group for, I believe, the only time between 1965 and 1970, so that's pretty cool. Bruce Johnston famously refused to join them for this concert, claiming that it had all just gotten too weird. I don't know, figure that out. And then we have some interesting ideas, using an organ as the main instrument and so on. Pretty cool. The rest of Live Sunshine is a series of shows, several shows for the November Wild Honey Tour. The group was on a bill with Buffalo Springfield, the Pickle Brothers again. I think Strawberry Alarm Clock played a couple of their shows and so on. Got some pretty interesting stuff. Each concerts, basically the same track list with one exception. So we'll jump into that and talk about Live in Detroit on November the 17th, 1967. It actually starts with Barbara Ann, so we go from Hawaiian Barbara Ann to Detroit Barbara Ann as the opener. I gotta say the audience seems a lot more receptive to the more upbeat, regular version they do in Detroit versus this slowed down organ version from Hawaii. Darlin' is played for the first time. That was released, I'm sorry, that wasn't released. They actually used a different take on Sunshine Tomorrow. We'll talk about the Pittsburgh take they use instead a little bit later. But Darlin's played for the first official time. Country Air from Wild Honey. Let's hold up Wild Honey here. I'll show you the back. Country Air replaced Surfer Girl as the slow song. The audience honestly seems pretty into it, but I can see why they probably wanted to stick with Surfer Girl as well. They do I Get Around, which they joke is an oldie but moldy, and so on. How She Boogalooed It is put, that is the penultimate track on Wild Honey, and my favorite song from Wild Honey. The live version's pretty slow, and Mike Love even admits at the beginning that they've done it so few times that they're probably going to fumble it up quite a bit, and they do a little bit. But the audience, again, seems to like it, and Dennis Wilson gets a big ovation. I guess just for coming out on stage, I don't know. But the audience, like, they're receptive to it, even though they'd have no way of knowing these songs yet, because Wild Honey wouldn't be out until December. And they do the usuals, Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows. California Girls is probably the most fascinating part, because for the Hawaii shows, they slow down the ending. Instead of doing girls, 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 yeah, I dig the girls, girls, they do this slowed down version where they say, I wish they all could be California girls. Doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo. I wish they all could be California girls. And make it kind of a much more tender, romantic moment. And half the band does it the first way, and half the band does it the latter way. So Mike Love has the audience vote by applause which one they prefer. And the audience overwhelmingly prefers the original, the upbeat, single kind of version of the song, not the ballad, romantic version. And it leads to my favorite line in the whole concert set when Bruce tells the audience after they boo the second time, he says, there will now be a charge to leave. And Mike Love says they will never ever play the slow version of California Girls ever again. So that should give you some idea of how that went over. They do Wild Honey, announcing that it had just come out as their new single. Actually, I think Wild Honey would be released. Wild Honey had already been out, that's right. Wild Honey had been out before. Darlin' would be released the same day as the Wild Honey LP. Sorry about that, I got my notes backwards. They do Graduation Day, one from the first Beach Boys concert album, which was surprisingly still a live staple at this time, even though they were trying to move away from a teenage audience. It should be noted that Mike Love also jokes that Graduation Day is so nostalgic, it'll make you throw up. He kind of talked similarly in the Graduation Day album there about some of the older songs. And they do Good Vibrations, and they finish up with Johnny Be Good, and that's the Detroit show. So like the first true blue Wild Honey show, very interesting stuff. And honestly, they do the Wild Honey songs at least serviceably well. For being brand new, I mean, you figure the audience wouldn't have heard them yet, so they might not know exactly what to judge. But apparently, they felt only Darlin' and the title song really belonged to stay in the live set. And we'll see that I don't think either Country Girl or How She Boogalooed It has ever been performed live again. So, something different there. They go to Washington, D.C. next. We've actually heard quite a bit of this show before. A few songs were released on Sunshine Tomorrow, notably California Girls and Graduation Day, and 3 of them appeared on the Pet Sounds set. So if you bought the 50th anniversary box set with the extra live stuff, at the end there it says how for the Daughters of the American Revolution Hall in Washington on November the 19th, 1967, we have recordings of Good Vibrations, God Only Knows, and Wouldn't It Be Nice. And they don't do a whole lot of editing either for these. I'm surprised because some of the other live tracks have been on here. They've sort of re-edited the intros and whatnot to make it flow a little better. But they didn't do a lot of that on the Pet Sound set for these shows. So we've heard quite a bit of the Washington concert before. Track list basically the same except Surfer Girls back in place of Country Air, and they skip How She Boogalooed It. The intro, Barbara Ann announces that the Beach Boys are indeed Capitol recording stars. And at the end, Mike Love has a weird monologue about how the hall does not allow comedians. I'm assuming this is a reference to the Pickle Brothers who were touring with them. Maybe they weren't allowed on the bill. I don't know. And he jokes about how much Joan Baez is going to hate that. I'm not quite sure. The audience thinks it's really funny. But if you know what Mike Love is talking about, please do comment below. It should be noted that this is not the complete Wild Honey tour. For example, the November 18th show at Lemoyne College is missing. So realize it's not a complete tour document, but the shows we do have are at least mostly complete. We have the shortest one next, the White Plains, New York show on November the 21st. The man introducing the show talks about the Beach Boys have recorded so many great songs, from Surfin' Safari to Good Vibrations to Wild Honey. It's odd he mentioned Surfin' Safari because they didn't do that in concert, I should say, on this tour at all for this entire year. We have just a few interesting things there. The White Plains show is pretty subdued, pretty slowed down there. Help Me Rhonda is put back in the set, and that's done as the intro. Maybe that was to take How She Boogalooed It spot. Again, some weird banter with the audience, notably Bruce yelling at the crowd to stop throwing ice cubes at them during graduation day. Not sure what that was all about. And at the very end, for Good Vibrations, which I don't think is actually the last song they performed, but is the last one on the tape, Mike Love introduces Nick Grillo, who was the Beach Boys business manager. And indeed, Nick Grillo would later be accused of mishandling some of their funds, whether it was embezzlement or just maybe investing it behind their back. I don't really know, but there was an Endless Summer Quarterly magazine that talked about Grillo's business involvement with the Beach Boys. So it's neat to hear Mike Love kind of shout him out and really build him up as a good business manager when there's debate as to if he had the group's best interest in mind. We have Live in Pittsburgh next. This is where the Darlin', the live version of Darlin', comes in on Sunshine Tomorrow. It's the only one not taken from Detroit from this box set. The rest of the Wild Honey songs are all from the initial Detroit show. So the Pittsburgh one, not a whole lot really to mention here, except for it has probably my favorite musical moment. The finale is Sloop John B, weirdly enough. And I'm sorry about that. Traffic outside. So the Sloop John B finale, Buffalo Springfield joins them on stage and performs with them, and they do a great finale, this big epic version of Sloop John B. The audience gets involved. It's really good there. The audience is super into it, and there's a weird bit of banter for Surfer Girl where Mike Love announces there's a girl in the audience who's been to 97 consecutive Beach Boys shows in Pittsburgh. And she gets a big round of applause, and Surfer Girl's dedicated to her. No idea about the veracity of that claim. Who knows? And lastly, we have Live in Boston. In Boston, we had one song from this. Their version of I Get Around is from that concert there. They actually asked the audience to vote. Would you rather hear I Get Around or Sloop John B? The audience yells and cheers, and you can't really understand what they're saying, so they perform both, which I think was probably planned because both were already in the live set and they'd done them plenty of times. But on November 23rd, the most recent concert we get, basically the same thing. Help Me Rhonda is the intro, Johnny B. Good's the closer. We have Darlin' and Wild Honey both done as new stuff. And that, my friends, will sum up the Sunshine Tomorrow box set. Or, excuse me, the Sunshine Tomorrow live component of the box set, I should say, because of course we still have to review the studio stuff, which we'll do that another time. This video has probably gone on plenty long, and the traffic noise is probably driving you crazy by now if you've come this far. It should be noted that some releases, like that aforementioned Good Vibration single, or the subject of my next video, Hawthorne, California, these claim to have some live Hawaii tracks, but they actually use the studio takes, the Lei'd in Hawaii stuff. So like this version of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring was not actually done live, it was recorded in studio. So ultimately, we go from Your College Show, released in 2016, this jumbo set, released in 2017, and we will talk about the 2018 release, the even bigger and crazier Beach Boys on Tour 1968. And here's where we'll really see the animosity towards their early songs come out. Because while there are a few moments on this box set, it's nothing ridiculous, but you can tell that by 1968 they were pretty much done playing Surfin' Safari and stuff like that. Not that they did a lot of the oldies on this tour either, But at the end of the day, I'd say go through, listen to a few of the songs on here. The group honestly sounds pretty good during the Wild Honey sections, and the Hawaii stuff is interesting just because of how unique it is and how different, and so on like that. Yeah, I mean, I hope that if you've come this far in the video, and I hope that you have an interesting comment to say about Wild Honey or about the tour, and put that below for me, because I'd love to talk more about it. Till then, my friends, go out there and get a taste of Wild Honey, and we'll see you next time.